Did you happen to click on this video? Well, that means you might be in the market for a used Chevy Equinox. That's right behind me today, I got a 2022 Chevy Equinox. These are an immensely popular SUV, sometimes with consumers, sometimes with rental car agencies. Both were big buyers. But today we are going to talk about the reliability and see if you should buy one with 150, 200,000 miles on it, and if it'll last to 250 or 300,000 miles. We're going to take a walk around, we're going to talk about the common problems, and then we are going to decide if the Chevy Equinox is a buy or a bust. Now, I'd love to address the elephant in the room, and that is that it just started pouring down rain here. But I still got this review plan, so we're going to struggle through it here. And as we walk around this little Equinox, obviously it's still fairly new, so there's not going to be a ton of stuff. These might have some cosmetic issues. Chevy paint has been known to peel and things like that. They are also a little bit too new as far as any consistent rust, but I do think we're going to see it along the rocker panels and wheel wells as these age, if you live somewhere in the Rust Belt. You're also probably going to see some headlight oxidation stuff as they age as well. But overall, for a few years old now, this thing still shines and looks pretty decent. I think Chevy did a good job with the styling on these. Under the hood of our little Equinox here, we got the 1.5 liter Ecotec turbo 4-cylinder engine that makes 170 horsepower, 203 pound-feet of torque. Now, as far as common problems on these engines, the two biggest ones that I've run into is oil consumption and turbo failure. As far as oil consumption, these are just kind of famous for using oil. So you got to keep an eye on your dipstick, make sure that you're keeping them topped off, and do oil changes regularly. As far as just your normal maintenance, they are a little bit more dependent upon regular maintenance. And then if you really aren't watching the oil consumption, you could also damage the turbo. The turbos have been known to just fail on their own though, just as a common failure point on these engines. That is a fairly expensive fix, especially if you're going to take it to a mechanic. Now, as far as other oil consumption issues, it's likely related to the PCV valve. That is a famous part for going bad on these. It's not terribly expensive and it's not terribly hard to replace. So I'm not really concerned about it, but it is one of the common failure points and one of the things you want to look at on these cars. Now, if you notice some hard starting, some rough running, things like that, carbon buildup is also pretty common on these. That's common on any direct injection engine, and you got to clean up the ports inside the motor. It is a little bit of a more in-depth labor process, but not terribly expensive, especially if you can DIY it yourself. Now, one of the notes I want to make on these engines is that all manufacturers are leaning towards small turbo 4-cylinder engines, and those inherently have more maintenance issues and just general problems and failure points than an older naturally aspirated engine, at least in most cases. So while these are not perfect, it's kind of just the direction the auto industry has gone as a whole. So yes, you're going to have a little bit more maintenance. You're going to have to keep up on things a little bit more than you did back in the old days. Now, this engine is mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission, and actually it's a pretty good transmission. Some of the vehicles on this platform also had a 9-speed that was slightly less reliable, wasn't terrible, but the 6-speed in these, other than routine maintenance, you're really not gonna have a ton of issues. Take one on a good long test drive, I would still recommend. Make sure you get the engine and transmission up to temp, get on them hard, shift normally, all of that stuff. And if it's working well on a used one, you're probably good to go for a lot of miles. Likewise, this is an all-wheel drive model. Obviously, it's primarily front-wheel drive. There's an all-wheel drive button in there, so you can turn it on and off in there, but the all-wheel drive system in these is pretty reliable. Change the fluid, you're gonna be good to go for a long time. If you do notice clunks, most of the time it is in the rear differential, and you can change the fluid back there. Moving on to the interior of our Chevy Equinox now, and I have never been more thankful to be inside of an interior than I am right now, because it is absolutely pouring down rain outside. So I love this interior right now. But as far as actual quality and things like that, I would consider this to be a run-of-the-mill mid-size SUV. There is nothing spectacular, but there's also nothing terrible. Yes, there's going to be hard plastic and just generally, you know, some of the cheaper options for build quality than a luxury or a Tahoe SUV or something like that. That being said, it's very comfortable inside. The actual space is pretty decent. As far as wear and tear, the seats have held up really well. Dash has held up, no cracks, fading, anything like that. GM is famous as far as wear and tear for their buttons rubbing off. Sometimes the rubber on like the steering wheel will crack and things like that, but this one has held up pretty nicely. Now, these are a little bit newer, so we haven't maybe seen some of the stuff that will happen as they age, but as far as electronics, infotainment can be glitchy, just like all infotainment systems, but really nothing terribly common. I'm sure we'll see some window regulators as they get older, and some HVAC issues as well. Those are going to be probably common as these age, but nothing out of the ordinary as far as any other cars out there on the market. Moving on to the second row here of our Equinox, and the Equinox, even in the prior generation, that was not a great car. That one was a bust. But in these, the seats sit really nicely. It's actually adjustable for your back up here. You have to adjust it up here, which is a little odd, but plenty of legroom, plenty of headroom for a smaller or mid-size SUV. Space is not going to be an issue. They use the same materials on the door panels in the rear as they did up front, so they didn't really cut any corners there. It's not luxurious by any stretch, but the seat material itself, I actually really like what they did on the interior of these. And you could easily ride back here for a long road trip with no problem at all. Moving on to the hatch here, space, again, is a huge selling point for these cars. Lots of space down in there for groceries or whatever, so they don't slide around. You have latches over here to drop the seats, which is really, really convenient, which will give you a nice flat floor. And there's just generally plenty of space back here for hauling anything that you need. Out on the road in our Chevy Equinox. Now, I'm excited about this one because I haven't driven a ton of these newer ones other than I did review a Terrain, which is very similar, recently. And I've always found that the older generation drove pretty nice, but they did have some reliability concerns. So I think GM did some work and improved the reliability on these. And if they drive the same, should be a pretty decent little car. Now, we'll start out with fuel mileage on these, and they are 26 and 31. That's not necessarily class leading, but for a little SUV, I think that's pretty decent numbers. And I think that's pretty consistent with what you'll actually experience as an owner of one of these. Now, we are on a back road that is very, very bumpy here, and everything feels really, really solid, nice. No clunks, nothing to be worried about on the suspension, but I do think at 125,000 miles, you're probably gonna have to start going through some of the things on the suspension, like sway bar, links, ball joints, things like that. It's gonna be pretty typical. Now, GM's most famous issue for suspension stuff is probably actually wheel bearings. The more I've done these reviews and the more I've researched, it seems like around 75 or 100,000 miles, just about every GM car has an issue with a wheel bearing. So, and when one goes, usually you have the other ones not far behind. Now, that's not the most expensive fix in the world, but it is something to look out for, especially if you have an ABS light on. Now, we are going around some corners, and let's feel how she feels. Much more car-like than it is like an SUV. Steering weight is actually really nice. Kind of impressed. And we will be out to a straight stretch of road here shortly to get on it. But as far as handling, it is better than I anticipated. The transmission so far has shifted really nice. You don't really think about it. And that's really the characteristics that you want in a transmission, is one that you don't think about at all. It's been very smooth, very intuitive. Yeah, I don't have much to say about it, really. It downshifts quickly right there. I got on it just a little bit. Really good stuff. All right, we got our straight stretch of road. We are at 30 miles an hour. Let's get on it. All right, let me tell you some things that I thought. Again, transmission, very solid. Power, minimal. We'll try it at another speed here in a second. It pulled fairly strong, like once it got going, but there was no pressure of my back to this seat at all. So we'll give it another shot here in a second. One of the other things I noticed about this one is it's a fairly loaded cloth model of this car. So it's not really a base model. It's got a 360 camera, it's got heated cloth seats, some really nice touches. So even if you're gonna get the cloth one, if you don't want leather, you still get a pretty loaded vehicle. All right, let's get on it one more time here. That felt a little bit better. 30 miles an hour just might not be the right speed to like really take off on it here, but I did that one at about 40 and it felt a lot better. Still not powerful. You're definitely dealing with a small 4-cylinder. We'll talk about this more at the end, but some people kind of hate on these, and the more research I've done about this engine, this transmission, the more I actually think that it's a pretty decent setup, other than it's just a turbo 4-cylinder that people don't like because, well, some of them just don't like turbo 4-cylinders, and I can't really blame them for that because they do require more maintenance. Back from the test drive, and now it's time to decide if the Chevy Equinox is a buy or a bust. The test drive went pretty well. Honestly, these drive really nicely. I'm kind of a fan of them overall. I think the space is great, and I think they're actually more reliable than what the forums online would lead you to believe. With 150,000 miles, the market on these is somewhere around $12,000. Now, there might be more reliable options out on the market, but you're also going to spend more money on those options. The biggest thing I think you want to look at is just maintenance on these guys. You're going to have a little bit more maintenance. No, the little turbo 4-cylinders aren't as reliable as some of the older engines that we're used to out there. But I do think Chevy improved the reliabilities a lot on these over the prior generation of Chevy Equinoxes, which did not have a great reputation. Overall, I'm pleasantly surprised with these cars, and that's why today I'm going to call these a buy. I think it's going to be a controversial decision, which happens sometimes in this business, but I recently reviewed the GMC Terrain, and that has a very similar powertrain to this one, and a lot of the owners for those said that they were rock solid. And it's really the people who don't own them who are saying that they're a bust. So that's why today we're going to call the Equinox a buy. I do think it's close. I think you're going to have a little bit more maintenance, and there might even be better options for a little bit more money out there reliability wise. If you have one of these and had a ton of problems, I want to hear all about it. Or if you've had a great experience, I want to hear about that too. I appreciate you guys following along. If you have any other comments, put them down below. I will see you in the next one.